Think about the last time you laid out a perfectly logical argument. You had the data, the historical precedents, the undeniable proof. You slid it across the table, fully expecting a breakthrough, only to watch the other person's mind slam shut. We usually assume they consume the wrong news or belong to a social bubble that actively feeds them incorrect information. But neuroscientists mapping the biology of deeply held beliefs are finding that the roadblock is the physical way the brain handles incoming information, regardless of the political or religious content. This structural mode of processing defines ideological thinking, shifting the focus from political content to cognitive mechanics. To navigate an overwhelming amount of daily information, the human brain constructs mental frameworks called schemas. These structural shortcuts help us quickly categorize everything from what a dog looks like to how a society should be run. You can think of a schema as a mental prism. Instead of absorbing objective facts, this prism bends incoming information so it fits into your existing worldview. Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget theorized this decades ago. If a devout religious believer and a strict scientific materialist look at the same newborn baby, their retinas receive the same raw visual data, but the believer's prism interprets that data as a divine gift, while the materialist's prism interprets it as a product of evolutionary biology. This filtering mechanism is standard psychology. However, when a cognitive prism calcifies and becomes rigid, the brain loses its ability to process new facts and begins to identify alternative positions as threats. When an adaptable brain encounters information that doesn't fit its current schema, it stretches and updates its mental framework to include the new reality, a process called accommodation. Dr. Leor's Migrod's pioneering research on cognitive rigidity identifies brains that physically struggle to adapt to new rules or changing environments. This can be measured through the Wisconsin card sorting test. Participants sort cards based on a hidden rule, like color or shape. When the rule suddenly changes, flexible thinkers adapt, but a striking pattern emerges. Individuals scoring high in extremism fail this adaptation task at identical rates. Whether far left, far right, or fundamentalist, they rigidly apply the old, broken rule. Cognitive rigidity suggests that extremism is a structural flaw in information processing, independent of any specific ideology. What physically happens inside a cognitively rigid brain the moment it encounters a contradictory fact? The first neurological step is the shutdown of the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for advanced logic and decision-making. Immediately, the amygdala, responsible for processing fear and disgust, flares up. Cortisol floods the system, triggering a full-body biological panic response. The brain interprets contradictory data as a physical attack, bypassing logical pathways. If the person pushes back and wins, stress chemicals are replaced by a hit of dopamine, rewarding the brain for defending the doctrine. This biological loop correlates with a heightened willingness to support violence against those outside the group. When individuals cannot cognitively adapt to new realities, they increasingly rely on rigid group defenses that rapidly fuel societal fracturing. In this state, the brain has successfully protected itself from a fact by treating it like a predator. This biological defense explains why more data, charts, and facts rarely shift a rigid thinker's position. Logic in spreadsheets cannot easily override an active hormonal fight-or-flight response. In many cases, providing highly credible evidence backfires. The stronger the proof, the more threatened the rigid brain feels, which causes it to become more entrenched in its dogma. Modern ideological debates are rarely about the actual facts. They are primal battles over biological safety and identity. We must acknowledge that every human relies on schemas and experiences moments of identity-driven cognitive inflexibility. The most effective antidote to a calcifying prism is the active practice of intellectual humility, the willingness to question one's own assumptions. To heal fractured public discourse, we must address the underlying biological fear that drives rigidity, rather than simply attacking the content of people's beliefs.